Yuma Kokohead is a character from the game Master Detective Archives Raincode. As the protagonist and main character, the story follows him as he explores Kanai Ward and solves mysteries. Yuma is introduced as an amnesiac with no memory of himself. Initially, he's assumed to be a trainee detective at the World Detective Organization because of the profile linked to his name. However, he's later revealed to be number 1 of the WDO. Yuma's story and journey are focused on his efforts to become a detective. He has to face questions about the meaning of justice and whether it's worth it to search for the truth. Throughout the game, Yuma is accompanied by Shinigami, a death god he made a pact with. She's the source of his amnesia, as he gave up his memories in exchange for access to her powers, namely her ability to access the mystery labyrinths. Along his journey, Yuma has to learn what it means to be a detective and solve mysteries. As the protagonist, he's the most important character in the game, so let's go ahead and take a closer look at him. Yuma is a Japanese given name. It's often gender neutral and can be used for either girls or boys. In the Japanese language, it's frequently written and pronounced with a long vowel sound, but when it's transliterated into English, it's usually just written with one U instead of two. Like many Japanese names, there are many ways to write the name Yuma in kanji. Unfortunately, because Raincode uses katakana for all of its characters' names, we have no hints or leads on what kanji Yuma's name would use. Additionally, unlike the other characters, Yuma is a pretty common name with a lot of different ways to write it. Rather than going through every single possible kanji combination for Yuma's name, I'll just focus in on the one character I saw multiple times that I think is most important, and that's the kanji for truth. This fits him in a pretty obvious way. As a detective, he's always looking for the truth. Less obviously, however, this character being present in his name ties him to Makoto, whose name means truth. It's a nice little link between them. Kokohead, Yuma's last name, is obviously pretty unusual. I've seen plenty of people make fun of it a little bit, and understandably so. Koko is a Japanese word meaning here, referring to a place that is closer to the speaker. It can also be a feminine given name. Head is pretty obvious. Everybody has one. You know what a head is. In terms of metaphors, the head is often contrasted with the heart, with the former being seen as more logical and the latter as more emotional. Detectives are supposed to be logical, and the WDO's creed instructs them to discard emotions while investigating. Somewhat ironically, the head is also the source of memories, which Yuma notably lacks. As we learn in Chapter 5, though, this name is not originally Yuma's. It comes from the trainee detective he swapped places with. The truth meaning could still apply, though, with the trainee detective turned ramen shop owner being the true source of the name. Yuma's original name is unknown and never revealed. Yuma's color scheme is very heavily purple, a color often linked with mystery and magic. This is perfect for Yuma. Not only does he investigate mysteries, but he sort of is one himself because of his amnesia. The color can also serve as another link between him and Makoto, who is always wearing a purple suit. Yuma's eyes have irises shaped like keyholes. A keyhole indicates something that can be either locked or unlocked, and this dichotomy could be seen as similar to the choices between revealing or not revealing the truth. When combined with the solution keys that Yuma uses to progress through the mystery labyrinths, his eyes could also serve as a very subtle hint that he himself is a major mystery. Yuma wears a WDO uniform, showing that he holds some sort of position within the organization. When he's outside in Kanai Ward, he wears a hat and a cape, and the cape is also present in the mystery labyrinths. The cape bears a badge for the WDO, despite the fact that, as a trainee, he's technically not a detective yet. Maybe trainees are given badges too, but this could also act as another hint about his identity. The back of the cape also has the alchemical symbol for sulfur. Yuma's illustration shows him with the Book of Death, where Shinigami was sealed. As number 1, he removed this book from the WDO's vault to make a deal with Shinigami. He also has it with him throughout the game, although we just don't see it very often. Yuma lacks confidence, and he often doubts himself. He starts out wondering why he even wanted to be a detective. At multiple points, he thinks he's just not good enough to be one. His in-game profile says his low self-esteem causes him to frequently complain. And we do see he has a number of complaints, even if he doesn't voice them out loud. His lack of memories contributes to his lack of self-confidence. He's not sure what the point of being a detective is if he remembers nothing about himself. Despite his doubts in himself, Yuma really is smart and intelligent. Although he's definitely guided by Shinigami, the other detectives, and even the mystery labyrinths themselves, he's still capable of piecing together and solving the mysteries he encounters. Yuma is also a pretty emotional person. It doesn't take a whole lot to frighten or disturb him. He's also easily angered in some situations, and he cries when something upsets him. Connected to his anger, Yuma is not above seeking revenge, or at least considering the idea. He's He's enraged by Shachi's death in Chapter 3 and hunts down the killer without hesitation. When Yomi is revealed as the mastermind behind Yako's plot, Yuma is genuinely pissed off that he can't kill him right then and there. And in Chapter 5, when he learns Makoto instigated Yako to hire the hitman and then took advantage of the whole plan to remove Yomi, he swears revenge against him. However, if this revenge is actually achieved, he feels pretty guilty about it. After killing Icardi in Chapter 3, he wonders if hunting down the killer was really the right thing to do, or if he just let himself be clouded by his anger. Yuma has a very strong sense of justice, and he always tries to help those in need. Through the requests, which are like little mini side quests, he readily helps the residents of Kanai Ward with their troubles. He often gets involved in cases because he's trying to help someone. In Chapter 1, he wants to save the boy's father, and in Chapter 2, he wants to help Kurumi find the truth behind her friend's death. Alongside his desire to help other people, Yuma also tries to understand them. This is shown mostly through the gumshoe gabs with the other detectives. They're all odd and eccentric in their own ways, so Yuma is a little confused and off-put by them at first. But he still makes an effort to befriend them and learn more about them. Yuma's personality is implied to have been different as number 1. His former self is only seen through very brief flashbacks, so there's not a whole lot to say about him at that time. But he does seem to act pretty different. His speech is more polite and formal, and he doesn't talk with as much feeling in his voice. He's not unfriendly though, and he trusts Shinigami to train him into a good detective. As his former self, Yuma still held his sense of justice and a desire to help other people. He wanted to eradicate mysteries from the world specifically because they cause suffering. He believes solving mysteries can bring peace and happiness to the world. A major difference between Yuma and his former self is that, as number 1, he's implied to have done everything alone. We see this through Makoto, who bore the weight of protecting Kanai Ward by himself for years. But by losing his memories, Yuma learned to rely on other people when he needed it. When number 1, the head of the WDO, is first introduced to us, he's presented as an old man. He gives the detectives in Kanai Ward an order to investigate mysteries in the city and uncover Kanai Ward's ultimate secret. This same old man appears once more after Yako's death. This time he explains the Great Global Mystery, which is a worldwide kidnapping case. Here, the WDO appears to have been attacked, and this leaves the man's fate uncertain. But that entire attack is revealed in the epilogue to have been just a hoax. And as is revealed in Chapter 5, that man was not number 1. He was just the body double, with the actual number 1 being Yuma. As explained by Makoto, the WDO has had other number 1s. He describes it as customary for them to have body doubles because they make a lot of enemies in the process of solving mysteries. This tells us that Yuma was not the only number 1, nor was he the first person to hold that position. Although he led the WDO for an unspecified length of time, he presumably wasn't the one who created it. Yuma gave up his identity as number 1 prior to entering Kanai Ward in order to do so discreetly. He also lost that identity along with his memories when he made a pact with Shinigami. Yuma's former self as number 1 is only seen in very short flashbacks. He apparently took the Book of Death from the WDO's vault in order to make a pact with Shinigami. He knew he alone couldn't solve the mysteries of Kanai Ward, so he needed help and turned to a death god to find it. He expresses a desire to bring happiness to people in the world by solving mysteries. In this regard, he's pretty similar to the amnesiac Yuma, whose desire to help people is often what spurs him along. By the end of the game, Yuma is no longer number 1. In the epilogue, it's revealed that he resigned from the position before even heading to Kanai Ward. Halara mentions the WDO detectives must now come together to select a new number 1. I find this interesting because it implies that the number 1 of the WDO is selected through some sort of voting process. If this is the case, that would be how Yuma ended up there. But then why didn't anyone know he was number 1? Sure, number 1 was said to rarely show his face in public, and his name also wasn't known, but what about the election process? Did no one see Yuma's face then? The only way I can think of to explain this away is if the candidates for number 1 are kept completely anonymous. Their names and faces are hidden during the election process, and they're only described through their achievements or fortes. Although that also wouldn't make a whole lot of sense because nobody knew what number 1's forte was, and no one recognized Yuma's coalescence as a forte. But the whole anonymity thing would make sense to me, considering the inherent danger of holding the number 1 position. When Yuma gave up his identity as number 1, he took on the identity, or at least the name, of Yuma Kokohead, a trainee detective at the WDO. That same man went to Kanai Ward, where he became a ramen shop owner. Yuma bumps into him several times throughout the game, and the man always runs away upon seeing his face. This man does serve an important role, as he's the one who figures out how to make food that the homunculi can eat without the need for human flesh. There are really only a handful of hints hints about Yuma's identity. First, he's shown to be terrible at cooking. This serves as a hint that he's not actually Yuma Kokohead, whose profile lists cooking as a special talent. Second, the WDO vault is only accessible to a handful of people, implying that someone would need a much higher authority than being a trainee detective to get in there and take the Book of Death. Finally, Shinigami seems weirdly evasive about number 1 when Yuma asks if she knows anything about him. Number 1 is presumably a master detective, someone with a forte. Yuma's forte is coalescence, which is the ability to use another detective's forte. In order for this to happen, he must have the other person's permission and he must hold hands with them. However, the whole permission thing seems to work pretty loosely. In Chapter 5, Makoto accesses the Mystery Labyrinth by using his own coalescence on Yuma, but all he said was something along the lines of "lend me a hand." He didn't specifically ask for permission to use whatever abilities Yuma had. Coalescence seems to work in 2 different ways. Firstly, it allows Yuma to experience the effects of a forte as its owner is using it. This seems to be the case with both Halara and Fubuki. Alternatively, coalescence can allow Yuma to use a forte regardless of if its original owner is actively using it. This is seen with Desuhiko and Vivia. Coalescence is also a 2-way street. Just as Yuma can use another detective's forte, those other detectives can access the mystery labyrinths. This is how the other detectives end up going with Yuma into the labyrinths. In Chapter 4, it's revealed that coalescence seems to only take the most recent person that Yuma used it on, since Vivia is pulled into the labyrinth while Fubuki is not. Accessing the mystery labyrinths also evidently doesn't require the hand-holding part. Yuma isn't holding hands with any of the other detectives when the mystery labyrinths open. This is probably because the mystery labyrinths aren't like a typical forte. They come from the pact with Shinigami, so coalescence interacts with them a little bit differently. When coalescence is first revealed, Yuma assumes it's Shinigami's power, but she kinda dances around it and doesn't really confirm that it's hers. She also seems a bit clueless about it at times, which serves as a hint that the power doesn't actually come from her. We don't know who the next number 1 will be. Along with resigning from the position, Yuma left the WDO entirely to wander the world on his own and solve mysteries. Yuma's story and arc largely revolve around his efforts to become a detective. In Chapter 0, he assumes he must be a master detective like the others he meets on the train. In the prologue, however, Yako tells him his profile lists him as a trainee. Obviously, though, Yuma was already a detective, and he must have been one good enough to become number 1 of the WDO. But he lost his memories by making a pact with Shinigami. During their time together, she often says she'll train him into a detective. In flashbacks to when they made their pact, she promises him the same thing. Yuma faces a lot of questions about what it means to be a detective and solve mysteries. He often doubts himself and wonders if he's doing the right thing or if he's worthy of being a detective at all. He's not sure why he wants to be a detective or if he can really help anyone by finding the truth. Yuma learns from Shinigami and the other detectives what must be done in order to carry out an investigation and find the truth. At first, he's hesitant to lie or bluff, but he learns from Halara that this is sometimes necessary. It's how he finally gets the priest to confess in the Mystery Labyrinth of Chapter 1. He bluffs about the evidence. Yuma's strong belief in exposing the truth is challenged a few times, but most notably by Vivia in Chapter 4. Vivia is the only detective to actively oppose Yuma in the Mystery Labyrinth. He wants him to prove his resolve, to prove that he can handle the harsh truth ahead of him. And though it's painful, Yuma is able to do it, and his belief in finding the truth is ultimately strengthened. Yuma must have been an excellent detective to become number 1 of the WDO. But that sort of status just wouldn't matter in Kanai Ward, where the peacekeepers cover up anything and make up whatever lies are most convenient to them. In fact, sauntering into the city as number 1 probably would have just put him in more danger. This seems to be why he sought help from Shinigami. The circumstances in the city meant he alone couldn't solve the mysteries there. Through his experiences in Kanai Ward and the encouragement he received from others like Shinigami and Kurumi, Yuma grows more confident in himself as a detective. Though no longer a WDO agent by the end of the story, he still seems to be going strong as a detective, and he's arrived somewhere new to solve even more mysteries. The mystery labyrinths are an important part of Yuma's development. He uses them to solve mysteries, but after Chapter 0, he's very hesitant to use them most of the time. In Chapter 0, he went into the mystery labyrinth completely unaware that the culprit would die at the end of it. This leaves him horrified upon learning that Shinigami reaping their soul causes the culprit's death. He feels heavy guilt about killing someone. Shinigami, meanwhile, sees it as no big deal because Zilch murdered several other people. Honestly, I can kinda see her point. She's not exactly wrong. Yuma's guilt over using the mystery labyrinth Labyrinth seems to be strongest in Chapter 2. He holds sympathy for the culprits, and it's easy to see why. Yoshiko, Waruna, and Kurane were just high school girls trying to avenge their friend's death because they knew the Peacekeepers would do nothing about it. Even when the culprit isn't someone he sympathizes with, though, like in Chapters 1 and 3, he still feels guilty about causing their deaths. In Chapter 3, he seems to have a different attitude at first. Shachi's death angers him, and he hunts down the culprit. This time, he doesn't hesitate as much to use the Mystery Labyrinth. However, right before Icardi's soul is reaped, he falls silent, like he's just realized what he's done and what will happen now. Afterwards, he wonders if he did the right thing. The Mystery Labyrinths are apparently influenced by the thoughts and mentality of the person exploring them. This really only occurs, or is at least only acknowledged, in Chapter 4. Partway through, Vivia points out that none of the questions so far have directly linked to the culprit's identity. He believes this reflects Yuma's hesitance to face the truth, which is that Yako is the culprit. At the very end of the labyrinth in Chapter 4, Yomi is revealed as the ultimate mastermind behind Yako and Dr. Weska's deaths. This is the only time Yuma is genuinely angry that he can't use the Mystery Labyrinth to kill someone. And who can blame him? It's Yomi fucking Hellsmile. When he's upset about the outcome of a case and the death of the culprit, Yuma often takes comfort in knowing he at least managed to save someone. In Chapter 1, he managed to save the boy from losing his father and saved the boy's father from being wrongfully executed. In Chapter 2, he rescued Kurumi from a false arrest. In Chapter 0, he might have incidentally saved himself. The death of the culprit gave Yako an extra bargaining chip to use when negotiating with Swank. Chapters 3 and 4 seem to be the only cases where the Mystery Labyrinth is ultimately pointless, although this isn't Yuma's fault. Both times he was backed into a corner. He didn't know the other detectives would show up with the culprit already apprehended in Chapter 3. And in Chapter 4, he didn't know Makoto would show up to arrest Yomi. As a side note, if the other detectives had already solved Shachi's murder, then why was the Mystery Labyrinth there at all? As seen in Chapter 5, they can be destroyed from the outside if the case is solved and the truth is revealed. So why was the labyrinth in Chapter 3 not destroyed when the other detectives solved the murder and caught Icardi? I don't really have an answer for this, I just think it's a bit of an interesting question to raise. Is there like some sort of threshold of people that have to know the truth before the labyrinth can be destroyed from the outside? I have no idea. The Mystery Labyrinths force Yuma to confront the fact that exposing the truth is never easy or consequence-free. No matter the outcome, somebody will be hurt in the process. I would argue that Shinigami reaping their souls is a more merciful fate for the culprits than whatever the Peacekeepers would do to them, although this really only applies for Chapters 2 and 3. In 0 and 1, the Peacekeepers weren't going to arrest the culprits anyway, and in Chapter 4, Yako was going to die regardless. The detectives sent to Kanai Ward were instructed to gather at the Nocturnal Detective Agency, as seen in the letter that Yuma finds himself carrying when he wakes up. As we learn, because of the Peacekeepers, the NDA is the only detective agency in the city. Upon his arrival to Kanai Ward, Yuma is saved from being arrested by Yako Furio, the chief of the Nocturnal Detective Agency. He feels very grateful towards Yako for saving him. Throughout the game, Yako becomes someone incredibly important to Yuma. After losing his memories, Yuma felt like he couldn't fit in anywhere, but he managed to find a home with the Nocturnal Detective Agency. He acknowledges Yako's flaws and shortcomings, and he's even annoyed by them several times, but despite all of that, he still finds a lot of comfort and security in him. Yako even reassures Yuma about his lack of a forte. Since he doesn't have one himself, he strongly believes that someone can be a good detective without a forte. The events of Chapter 4 are, needless to say, extremely hard on Yuma. He's devastated when Yako is stabbed, and he's just in complete disbelief when Shinigami tries to tell him that he's certain to die. He's absolutely furious towards Yomi for instigating Yako into killing Dr. Weska, a sort of powerful anger that we haven't seen from him otherwise. Yuma was so resistant to believing Yako was the culprit behind Dr. Weska's death that even the Mystery Labyrinth bent to his hesitance. He subconsciously knew it, and at the end of the case he acknowledges this, but he refused to let himself believe it. It would be painful enough to acknowledge that Yako was the culprit just for the fact that it would mean believing he killed someone. But more importantly, I think, is that Yuma didn't want to believe Yako was the culprit because it would mean his death was guaranteed. If he went through the entire mystery labyrinth, uncovered Yako as the culprit, and had Shinigami reap his soul, there would be absolutely no coming back from that. If he didn't have to do that, he could keep believing, despite Shinigami's words, that Yako could still be saved. Dr. Weska's murder and Yako's death force Yuma to question his belief in exposing the truth. Vivia turning against him makes this point even more clear. Reaching the truth can be incredibly painful, and finding it can shatter everything you believe you know. Yuma has to learn to accept that, and experiencing it himself is far more impactful than just knowing it in the abstract. Yuma sees Yako as a zombified homunculus in Chapter 5. Even though he's obviously not the same, Yuma is still happy to see him again. Yako gives him a disc with a video showing the death of the original Dr. Weska, which is an important piece of evidence for figuring out what happened to Kanai Ward. Though he wants to chase after Yako when he starts to walk away, Shinigami convinces him to let go and move on. So rather than following him, Yuma just thanks Yako for everything he did for him. Number 1 made a pact with Shinigami, giving up his memories in exchange for access to her powers. However, obviously, he doesn't remember making the pact upon waking up as Yuma Kokohead. Throughout the game, Yuma is often unnerved and annoyed by Shinigami, and who can blame him, but he ultimately comes to rely on her. He counts on her to save him when he's cornered, and they both grow to care about each other. In Chapter 5, Yuma almost sacrifices himself because he can't think of another answer for Kanai Ward's problems. This upsets Shinigami, who doesn't want him to make such a decision by himself, and she encourages him to rely on her again and keep moving until he can find another solution. At the end of Chapter 5, Shinigami gives Yuma the emergency exit so he can leave the mystery labyrinth and survive. However, this would sever their pact and cause him to lose all of his memories of her. Even though it means he would live, he's extremely upset about forgetting her. Yuma promises Shinigami that he will show her a world of happiness. She says it might be possible for him to remember just a little bit if he really tries. After exiting the mystery labyrinth and leaving Kanai Ward, Yuma leaves the Book of Death with Kurumi, along with a note asking her to hold on to it until he returns for it. His promise to Shinigami could be a huge motivator for trying to solve mysteries around the world. Even if most of his memories of her are gone, he still wants to see her again. To him, Shinigami is important enough that he doesn't just give the Book of Death back to the WDO. It also shows that he trusts Kurumi quite a lot because he leaves the book with her rather than anyone else. The WDO's creed instructs detectives to reach a perfect solution through a perfect deduction. Number 1 presumably believed in this strongly, as seen through Makoto. He states that he tried to follow that creed as much as possible, but the fact that he couldn't make it work is a part of why he grew to resent his original self so much. Yuma's biggest struggle in Chapter 5 is that he realizes the same thing Makoto did. He just can't find a perfect solution for Kanai Ward. So he determines that he shouldn't be the one to find it. The residents of this city should be allowed to choose it for themselves. Despite the possibility of betrayal, Yuma trusts Makoto to follow through with telling the residents the truth and working with them to find a path forward. He believes in Makoto's love for Kanai Ward and acknowledges that everything he did was for the sake of the city. This is a change from Yuma's previous opinions on Makoto. He started out suspicious of him, then became enraged when learning about his actions, especially his involvement in Yako's death. But he ultimately comes to understand him, trust him, and help lift the weight that's been burdening him for so long. Yuma doesn't want Makoto to suffer any longer by carrying everything by himself. By losing his own memories, he was able to start from scratch and learn how to rely on others for help. He now wants Makoto to realize that very same lesson. Kanai Ward's situation leads Yuma to realize that detectives can't solve everything, especially when they're an outsider to the situation. There are 2 types of solutions. One is an objective answer to a problem, such as a math equation. The other is a way to resolve an issue. When it comes to things like Kanai Ward, sure, there might be one objective truth, but that truth in and of itself is not the solution. This can all tie back to Chapter 4. One point Vivia really hammered home was that once you realize a truth that shatters everything you know, you have to figure out how to continue forward. What's on the other side of that truth? Yuma wants the residents parents of Kanai Ward to know the truth about themselves and their city so that they can reach that other side. When departing from the WDO and resigning from his position as number 1, Yuma gives a very important directive to the detectives of the WDO. He wants them to discard the organization's previous creed and find their own to follow, just like he wanted the people of Kanai Ward to choose their own path forward. As the protagonist of Rain Code, Yuma fits very well. His amnesia and lack of self-confidence result in a great journey through learning what it means to be a detective and finding his place in the world around him. I find him to be pretty well written. He goes through notable ups and downs, and his beliefs are challenged multiple times. I also love his bonds with the other detectives. He views them as both friends and mentors, and it's nice to see how much he tries to understand them despite their oddities. When you look at Yuma at the beginning of the game and compare him to how he is at the end, the changes he went through are pretty clear. He's more sure of himself, and he's found the determination to continue pushing forward and find an answer. He's learned very valuable lessons about being a detective. The end of the game did in fact make me cry when I played it. I was very sad to see Yuma and Shinigami separate because it just felt wrong on some level. They've been together for the entire game, so you kind of get used to seeing them as a pair. But that concludes my analysis on Yuma. I personally loved him from the very start of the game, and as I continued to play, he just grew on me more and more. In a lot of ways, he feels pretty reminiscent of Shuichi Saihara from Danganronpa V3, which is another character I'm very fond of. With the end of this analysis, though, we also reached the end of my Rain Code videos. I've talked about literally every major character in the game, so there's nobody left I want to discuss. Does this mean I'm guaranteed to never ever make another video on this game ever? No, probably not. I can always come back to it in the future if I have another idea for a video I could make. I don't have anything planned though, so for now I'll consider this to be the end of my videos on Rain Code. I hope you enjoyed this video, and any of my other Rain Code videos if you've seen those too. And if you haven't, maybe give them a watch. It's been a hell of a journey to get here, and although I'll miss talking about these characters in this game, I am glad to have this over. Thank you for watching, like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and have a good day.